So currently, the Syrian civil war between the rebel forces and the Assad regime is one of the biggest and most important ongoing conflicts in the world today. And it's interesting from an international relations standpoint, but it's also interesting from a journalistic and media standpoint because through this war we're seeing sort of the beginning of new trends in war reporting and in citizen journalism. And in today's Blogging Heads post, we're going to be discussing and examining some of the major facets of internet citizen journalism in Syria.
Yeah, so Syria has shown us, it's been sort of the first big example of war that has relied pretty predominantly on citizen journalism. We could see from Liz Sly, one of the Washington Post reporters, attempts at trying to get into the country and obtain information, but she was only able to get into the country 3 times and had to rely pretty heavily on citizen journalism to obtain her information. Because the reporting it's a pretty dangerous job. They're in the middle of a war, but also because the citizen journalists are motivated by something that Liz Sly and other sort of international journalists aren't motivated by, which is sort of a need to get the story out because they're so close to the issue and because the issue is so personal and has a pretty big effect on their lives.
Yeah, currently the Committee to Protect Journalists ranks Syria the most dangerous country in the world for journalism. It's a very media-unfriendly place. Reporters Without Borders ranked it 176th on their annual Press Freedom Index, so it's hard for journalists to actually get into the country, as seen with the example of Ms. Liz Sly. So there's a lack of foreign correspondents in Syria just because of how dangerous and media-unfriendly the country is. Well, a lot of these sort of like on-the-ground citizen journalists, they really want to get the story to the West, so they're willing to put their lives at risk even. And one interesting example of this is something called the Syrian Observatory for Human Rights. This is run by basically one guy, and he goes around, looks through information, looks through public reports, does some research of his own, and he basically tries to compile as much information as he can about the body count in the war, instances of human rights violations, and he keeps this blog, and this blog is currently a sort of go-to source for Western journalists. Major news networks like CNN are also incorporating video shot by citizen journalists into their reporting, as seen here.
As evidenced by this clip, international news conglomerates are relying less on their foreign correspondents than they're relying on citizen journalism.
So there are 2 obvious benefits of citizen journalism. 1, the citizen journalists are on the ground and have a good understanding of the context of the conflict, and second of all, they are more motivated to report on it because they feel an individual and personal connection to the conflict itself.
So something that we've seen with citizen journalism is that, though it is very, very helpful in some ways, there are some biases that are present due to it being citizen journalism versus professional journalism. One of these biases is that, so one of the ways that citizen journalism has gained so much traction is that, like we've said, that the journalists are really motivated to get the story across because while for international reporters it's news, for them it's their lives. But one of the side effects of this is that they are so convicted in trying to get their message across and gain attention from the West that oftentimes they try to control their message, which is something that Kathleen Bartzen-Culver's article for PBS MediaShift showed. She said she interviewed a journalist who strove to sort of fight against that trend, strove to be objective and transparent, and she was met with a lot of criticism from activists who thought that she was being too complacent and that she wasn't showing the real picture.
Yazan Hamsi, who's a citizen journalist and a prominent blogger in Syria right now, he mentions something that he calls, quote, media activists. So basically these aren't journalists, but they're rather people, activists in Syria who are vehemently against the Assad regime. And they kind of view media as journalism as a means to an end. Like they don't view journalism as the way we view it, as a way of reporting truth objectively to other people, but rather they view it as a extension of their fight against Assad. They think that if we can get our version of the truth, that if we can report cruelties and sort of the various acts that Assad has committed against the people of Syria. If we can report this to the West, we can increase this. We can make our case more sympathetic to people in the West and increase, I guess, awareness and interest from the West as a whole.
Necessarily, and that's sort of the difference between the international reporting and the citizen journalism, is that to obtain objectivity, people aren't willing to go to the same measures as the citizen journalists who are doing it to protect their lives and to sort of promote change in their country. And so it's sort of a double-edged sword in that citizen journalism both provides a lens that's closer to the action, but is also sometimes restricted by the message.
I think narrative bias also plays a very big role. Because we're getting all our information from one side of the story, the side of the rebels, we run the risk of simplifying a very complicated conflict into a simple battle of good versus evil. We kind of did this when we reported on the U.S. intervention in Iraq. We sort of portrayed Saddam Hussein's regime as being all evil and the United States intervention as being a good force, a force of freedom. And we run the risk of applying the same sort of very broad, generalized narrative biases to the Syrian conflict. Another big problem with citizen journalism in Syria right now is they have a tendency to focus too heavily on media-friendly, attention-grabbing events. Now, like we said, one of the main reasons why a lot of citizens take up journalism in the first place is they want to share and spread information about their cause and about their conflict to the outside world. And to do this, you need to grab people's attention. So a lot of citizen journalism's they focus their reporting on sort of these media-friendly, attention-grabbing events like shootings or bombings or other such very graphic, high-energy events. And this is most apparent in video journalism. As we can see here, this is a video of the Free Syria Army fighting the Hezbollah. It is a live firefight shot by one of the members of the Free Syria Army. And this is the kind of video journalism that we see very often. It's very graphic, it's very attention-grabbing, but we're given very little context, we're given very little reason as to the build-up, why this conflict started, and we're sort of left with a very disjointed view of the conflict.
Like you said, there's not a lot of context. If you see a video of a firefight, you don't necessarily know what happened before or what happened after, and all you see is the violence. And I think we've seen definitely there's a general perception among the public that is formulated around these sensationalist videos that doesn't necessarily go into detail about what's happening after the firefights and what's happening leading up to the firefights. And that's a pretty crucial part of the war, and it ties back to the same sort of bias that we've been talking about, and that citizen journalists really want to get those videos out because that's the impression they want to create, right? They want the West to see that violent, graphic videos, and they want that to be what the West thinks of what's going on in Syria.
I definitely think there are a lot of positive sides to video journalism as well, however. Back when the United States fought the Vietnam War, it was called the first living room war because people could tune into the war on the television and see what was going on visually. And that visual connection that they had to the war was really powerful. It allowed people, in a way, to witness the war firsthand, to witness its horrors, to gain a better understanding and a better context of the war. And I think that the Syrian YouTube phenomenon is kind of Vietnam War reporting 2.0. Of course, it is true that, like we mentioned, there's the danger that people can gain a fractured view of the war, or it becomes over-sensationalized. But at the same time, I think that the visual window that these YouTube videos give into the Syrian conflict are really powerful, and they allow people to gain a better understanding of really the true scope and the true horrors of the war, and also to see it in better context. And I think that it allows people to feel connected to the war instead of viewing it as some very isolated thing. I think it reminds us constantly that this is a real war fought by real people. And I think that in this way, video journalism, although it has its flaws, also has great potential. If you want sources for reputable video and news from Syria, check out the New Republic article we linked in the description. Yeah, but the really positive thing, I guess, or not, one of the more positive aspects of recent developments in Syrian citizen journalism is that a lot of work is being done to counteract this trend. Journalism classes are actually being held for a lot of independent radio broadcasters. people who want to start an independent radio show, people, there will be resources, organizations like Reporters Without Borders. They'll actually help them start up. They'll teach them how to protect themselves against threats, how to report objectively, and they'll kind of teach these journalists the importance of like fact checking and all these sort of professional standards that professional journalists have. And also, this kind of leads into another more, I guess, internet-focused change, which is that many citizen journalists are currently holding classes with professional journalists through Skype and Google Hangouts. So really the internet's not only being used as a method of getting journalism out to the West, but also as a way of teaching and sort of nurturing citizen journalists' professional values like, fact-checking, like objectivity, transparency.
Yeah.
So the internet's also being used in this like sort of positive, encouraging way.
Yeah, the development of the internet has really facilitated this citizen journalism, which is why Syria is sort of the most modern and most powerful example of citizen journalism.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.